And unfortunately, what tends to happen is the people that you're communicating with haven't learned communication well, and they're living in that hurt and that conflict, and it's showing in the way they're talking to people.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that like every single person out there who's a total jerk has had something awful happen in their life, but let's be real. We live in a world full of sin, and I think a lot of people have hurt and bitterness and anxiety and all these things that comes out in the way that they communicate. Hey, welcome back to the Project Revival podcast. I'm Laura.
I'm Emily.
And you're joining us for part 2 of communication, jumping into conflict resolution.
Yes, exciting. So first, we talked about just the high-level biblical communication, what the Bible says about communication. We looked at the verse, Romans 12:18, that says, if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone, as well as Proverbs 15:1 that says, a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. And then finally, James 1:19, my dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. And we talked about what impact that can have on just relationships and ourselves in kind of part 1. In part 2, we discussed that we want to talk about just 5 things for us to consider when we have conversations, whether those conversations are difficult things that we need to talk to because we already have conflict,
Right.
or how we can have just general communication to hopefully avoid getting to a place of conflict. And these are areas that they work for me. I think that they're things that have been modeled to us in our family. There's a lot of principles that you can take away from them, but it's just 5 really basic things to consider. It's going to seem oversimplified, but I promise you, if you can apply these things to your life, you'll see a shift in the way that people probably hear what you're saying, but also respond to you.
Absolutely.
And that is the first couple are really sometimes what you should consider before you start the conversation.
Right.
And that is to consider the time and to consider the place. So I say the time because I think we've all probably been part of conversations that happen at a time where your first response is the person listening is like, why in the world did you choose now?
Yeah, exactly.
And so I think time is a really important thing to consider. Now, this can have different layers to it because it can literally be, when you think about time and place, so I'm kind of combining the first 2, there can be things where it's like, this is a conversation we need to have, and it's a conversation that has to happen. It's really important, but this is not the time and this is not the place.
No, not at all.
And so I think before you even think about it, you've got to think about like, am I doing this? Is it out of selfish ambition? Because I really just want to have it right now. Because the concern, if you haven't considered those things, is that you haven't been slow to speak and slow to become angry. You are likely reacting if you are not choosing the time.
Or you're doing it for selfish reasons like, man, I just want to get this off my chest.
Yes.
But it's like Christmas. And, you probably shouldn't be getting it off your chest right now.
Like you're on the way to something like church and you're like, we've got 3 minutes and the kids are in the car.
Or it's, 11:59 p.m. and I'm like, really? Right now?
Right now.
I said goodnight? Okay.
Right now. And that place is important too, because you're thinking about is that other person comfortable in this location? Is it because of, you're more comfortable? Like it's at night, you are thinking about it, but it's not the right time. So time and place are things that I think you can consider both literally at the time, but also before. Like that's what slows it down.
Right.
Because if you really get in the habit of considering the time and the place, it has you pause a little bit before you jump right into the conversation.
Absolutely. And as you said, that will slow you down from anger. Because I feel like if you immediately jump down someone's throat because they did something to hurt you, well, that's not going to be productive at all. But if you do wait and you prayerfully consider it and you say, hey, can we pick a time that we can just have a quick conversation because I just wanted to talk to you about something? Game changer.
And that leads you to the third one, which is consider the message.
Yes.
And these all kind of influence each other, because if you react and you choose a bad time and a place to have a conversation, it's often because you don't know what your message is. You are just responding or reacting to something that's been going on, or it's been eating you alive and you just like it stems up from something that's not right.
Right. You finally snapped.
Yeah. But once you slow down, here's what's funny is like once you slow down and you think, okay, I'm going to have a conversation, and this is when I should do it, and here's where we should do it, which often requires coordination or thought. It slows you down, and then you're like, well, shoot, what is it I really want to talk about anyway? It can help you get down to the nitty-gritty of what it is you want to share.
And sometimes it can help you realize there's really nothing to share. You just had a moment of you overreacted, or maybe they didn't really say what you thought they said.
Right.
You know, I mean, there's so many times that you're like, okay, do I really need this to be a whole conversation, or can I just let this go?
Yeah, exactly.
And not letting things go where they need to be discussed and you're allowing it to build up resentment. That's a very big difference. I'm talking more like someone was a jerk to you in that moment and you just need to be like, okay, they were having a bad day and move on.
Yeah.
Sometimes it doesn't have to be this huge, let's sit down and have a conflict resolution
you start
conversation.
to think through, okay, here's my message to that person. I'm considering the time, I'm considering the place. And I'll share the last two so we can get into some practical parts.
Yeah.
The last two are considering your motive, because you're kind of speaking on this, like both of us are speaking on this already, and then considering your audience. Okay. So I'm going to think about the time and the place, the message that I want to have, and then I'm going to take a second to consider my own motive in this. Is my motivation because I'm trying to heal or restore some kind of relationship, set a boundary because it really does need to be discussed, be proactive, like, hey, we need to have this conversation to avoid conflict. Is it because I'm really just trying to get to know someone and I was a little unsure about what you were talking about before, whatever that is? Or is my motive because I want to make that person feel bad?
Right.
I'm frustrated and it's not fair that they took this from me.
That's more often than not. It
where
really
we're just kind of poking the fire. And it's not to say, again, like you said, we don't just literally walk away and say, okay, fine, because then you just become this victim of, I don't know, kind of like just carrying the weight, like you take that on as a burden. I lived that way for a long time. People could kind of say and do whatever they wanted to me. And I just was like, I was too much. Oh, they probably didn't mean it.
Yeah.
That wasn't, and then I didn't set any boundaries at all.
Right.
And so that was where, when considering your audience is really important too, because, you know, you think about like a marriage, you know, my audience is my husband.
Yeah.
I don't have a choice but to live at peace with him, or it's going to just be a miserable existence.
Absolutely.
And so it matters. So like there's equity there. You've built this trust and this investment where you have to find a way to be able to have these honest conversations.
Well, and when you know your audience and you know, like, for instance, if it is your husband or my husband, I know that he doesn't do well with certain types of communication. Yeah. So we have really, truly learned that the best way to communicate with each other is a lot of times a text message that says, hey, here's everything I need to say to you, gives you a few hours to process. Can we set a time to just discuss it? You can figure out the best way to communicate with different people. You may have friends that are like super shy in person and do not want to have a conversation in person. Okay. I mean, pen and paper, email, like there's lots of different ways that you can communicate well. And if your motive is right, then you can say things in the way that are going to be okay for the audience.
Well, and like you said, your spouse, you get to know. Your parents, you might, you feel like you know your parents, but if you're a teenager, you probably haven't gotten to a place where you're like, okay, mom, what's your love language?
Yeah, exactly.
How do you communicate? If I react this way to you, how does it make you feel? Like, have you considered your audience on just those more frequent conversations of who you have to interact with? You know, you're not going to know everything about your teacher, you know, if you have to go up. So those are just some basic. But if you stop and look at these principles and you say, okay, I need to go have this conversation. My teacher thought this. I want to talk to them about this exception. Okay, where does it make sense for me to go walk right up to them when they're not expecting it at the end of class, when they have stuff to do?
Is it better to
I'm right in
schedule a
front of other
time?
people.
Yeah.
Should I schedule time? And then what is it that I'm going to say? Yeah. How am I communicating this? It slows you down to consider it. And then what's my motive? Like, and how are they going to perceive that? Am I just trying to get out of something, or is it truly because I struggled with this? And then my audience, they're a teacher. They probably have a lot of experiences with other kids who have struggled with this, or just try to get out of something. And that's not fair. So I'm going to make sure that the way that I communicate what I'm looking for considers all of those things. It shifts everything.
Absolutely.
Because often I'll receive an email in administration, and it is... the first reaction I have is defensiveness and being offended. Like, I am offended and defensive. That's my first reaction, because very often people react and type, and we talked about this last time, type something really quickly because they're like, I can't believe this. I feel attacked, blah, blah, blah. I'm blaming, I'm shaming people. And I have to take a step back. And I've talked to our kind of new campus director about this. Like, we work together and we'll look at things. In my experience with specifically our program, where I'm telling her, like, this may be a new family I haven't built equity with.
Yeah.
So I'm going to consider the fact that they're reacting because of their past experiences at a school where maybe that administration really didn't respond the same way or care as much. So I'm responding in a way that's like, man, I'm offended. How could anyone say that about me? How could they accuse me of not caring for their student or caring for this, that, or the other? When the reality is I do. I'm like, they don't know that I lay my head on my pillow at night worrying and praying about doing my best job in leadership. But then the truth is that they don't know
exactly
that I lay my head on my pillow at night praying and leveraging everything for their kid.
Giving the benefit of the doubt
Communication.
comes in.
So when I respond, thank you so much for reaching out. I can't imagine how it must feel to have gone through this and felt this way.
Right.
Let me assure you that I know you don't know me very well, but here is a little bit about me.
Right.
And without knowing that must have felt this way to you. And so let me help bridge the gap between how I want things to be and how you experience them. And I'm sorry about that. Yeah. Let's work together. Can we talk? Can we meet? And that just completely changes the tone. But really what it's done is it's gone through, like, I've done it, I do it quickly now, but like, I'm considering those things right away. Right. Is this the right time? Because sometimes it is, like you kind of alluded to, is like it's a more casual, something happens right then that someone says. I'm not suggesting that if you're out and about, that you should just let people walk all over you because you need to stop and consider the time and the place and all of these things.
You can do that in the snap of a finger.
It can be very quick.
And that's one thing that I know we talk about our grandma a lot. Just put in context, I don't know if anybody actually knows that, like, we moved in with my grandma when I was 3 and you were 6.
6, yep.
So we pretty much considered our grandparents a second set of parents.
And she was young. I mean, she was young when she got married, young when she had her mom.
Yeah. So,
when she died, she was 62 and I was 17. Yeah. So she was very young.
She was very close to us. We were very close to her. We talked to her a lot, but she was a huge influence in both of our lives. But one of the things that she always taught me about conflict resolution in general is her number one thing was kill them with kindness. If they are obnoxious to you, kill them with kindness. You catch more flies with honey. I mean, you think that that's like a classic grandma saying, but at the same time, that's what I've always done.
Have you ever tried to escalate a conversation with someone who's smiling and being nice to you?
They always feel rude.
It can make you mad because you're like, I want you to be mad. Like, I want you to be.
And that's what she would always tell me. I had a lot of issues with kind of mean girls growing up, and she would just say, if you respond the way that they're responding, they're going to keep doing it. Right. But if you respond with kindness and kind of an attitude of like, that's your best line, really? Right. Just kind of brushing it off, then all of a sudden it kind of just stops because it takes the fun out of it for the other person.
So if you're talking about just your basic friendships and you're a teenager or young adult listening to this and you have to kind of go through this process quickly, if you're out and about with a group of friends and someone's been in the habit of saying something to you that's undermining, rude, just insulting, whatever the case is, and they don't really know you and they're not your best friend and you're not trying to work through some large scale conflict in your friendship. This is just a general person in your life who's saying something. It is okay to set a boundary, a verbal boundary. Hey, that's
don't
not
talk
cool.
to me like that.
It can be very, very simple. Hey, I don't appreciate that. That's not me. And I just, whatever. If you're with someone that you are close to, set the boundary. You know what? Like, I'm not interested in being in that place again with that person. It's okay to do that. We don't have to. Being, like when we talked about if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. That does not mean you just go be around people all the time who are treating you
Because the reality
horribly.
of it is you don't get peace without conflict resolution.
Right.
So if someone's constantly walking all over you or being obnoxious or doing all the things, you are not going to feel at peace with that person. You're going to constantly be building up resentment, even if you think you're the type of person that you can just brush it off.
Yeah, you're not actually brushing it off because you start to believe that something's wrong with you, and that's what Satan does, right?
Yes.
In isolation, he does those things. He repeats those tapes for us. So really what we're saying is that when we consider these 5 things, they can be done very quickly, but they also, when you're considering your audience, which is the last one, sometimes like at the very beginning, if it's a quick thing, I'm considering my audience right off the bat. This is someone who has equity in my life. This is someone who I place value on. This is a relationship I need to protect. Therefore, I'm going to go through the whole thing. I'm going to do it slow. Or I'm out and about. And again, not like, oh, treat people badly who you barely know. What I'm saying is that when there has been a pattern of behavior, despite your attempts to set boundaries, then you have to decide, is this someone who's like, I have no choice. I've got a whole year that they have to be in my small class. I've got, I'm in a college group with them and we have to study together and work through this cohort for the next however long. You may not be friends with them after that, but you need to be able to work through it. That may be something where you like, I don't love this, but I need to try and have a conversation with this person. I'm going to think about where would that make sense? When would that make sense? Yeah. I'm going to really think about how I can be concise in what it is I'm trying to communicate. Maybe that's just setting a boundary and saying, hey, I know we're not best friends. I know you don't know me and I don't know you very well. And I'm happy to get to know you more because I've learned in my life that often when I've got conflict with someone, it's because I maybe am missing something, like I don't know something. So if there's ever anything you want to share with me, I'm an open book. I'm happy to listen. I'm happy to pray for you about anything going on in your life. But what I'm noticing is that every single day when we're together, like I'm hearing these subtle jabs and it's really hurtful to me. Yeah. And so I'm trying to figure out what I can do to help us get through this time and do it with a little more peace. Yeah. Notice that I'm not saying, You've been really mean to me. Every time I sit down, you say things to me. So one of the things I learned in conflict resolution is the I am statements. So you're saying the same message, but using I am statements, or I feel. When this happens, I feel this way. Right. And honestly, what's worked well for me is when you take time to have this conversation, and I've gone, gosh, I mean, my motivation when I slowed down and I'm not angry anymore, my motivation is just to be able to like live somewhat at peace with this person. Right. That person obviously has to be hurting because nobody would be that rude if they weren't. And you start to slow down and think about that a little bit. Usually I can find a way to communicate something where like that person's, and I don't want them to feel bad, but like that person's feeling conviction about the way they've been behaving and realizing that the goal isn't working. Right. You know?
And that's where the kill them with kindness comes in, because it's frankly, a lot of times people, I feel like there's always two options. One, they're just a bully to be a bully. And when you stop caring, they stop feeling the need to bully you. But the other option is they've never had anybody show them kindness in their life. Yeah. And they don't even know how to communicate because maybe they grew up in an abusive home. Maybe they grew up with people constantly screaming at them and they're tame compared to what they grew up with.
Like they've never known anything else in their relationship.
Exactly.
And I'm telling you the number of times through just youth ministry, North Point, like just different friendships, church, being around in church, watching our parents lead different small groups. It floors me the number of times that you learn something about someone's background and it just blows my mind.
Everything,
I'm like, I can't even believe that they muster up any element of kindness at all. And sometimes people had a wonderful childhood, a wonderful home, and they just loving parents, but they're just kind of a jerk to you. And at the same time, they're living in that condition themselves. It is harder to be someone who doesn't try to live at peace with everyone than it is to try to live at peace with everyone.
It's like you try to tell that to people, and we're going to do a whole episode on forgiveness and unforgiveness, but it's true. I mean, it actually hurts you more than it hurts 100%. Anybody else. So it's like when we're going around holding all this conflict, not communicating well, not having forgiveness for people, we're the ones getting hurt over and over and over again. And unfortunately, what tends to happen is the people that you're communicating with haven't learned communication well, and they're living in that hurt and that conflict, and it's showing in the way they're talking to people. Yeah. And I'm not saying that like every single person out there who's a total jerk has had something awful happen in their life, but let's be real. We live in a world full of sin, and I think a lot of people have hurt and bitterness and anxiety and all these things that comes out in the way that they communicate. Yeah. And again, I think both of us are, just with several situations in our life, we're very, very quick to forgiveness. And again, not in a way that we get walked all over anymore, but in a way that we truly are like, you know what? Man, something just has to be going on in your life. And I know that normally you talk kindly, or maybe you never do. And I'm just going to continue to love you the best that I can.
At the very least, that person inside, like at the heart of the issue, is struggling with insecurity,
Absolutely.
self-doubt, bitterness, anger, resentment, fear.
And we all struggle with those
All of
things.
it.
I tell teens all the time, it doesn't matter how you're feeling, you're not alone.
Right.
Everybody feels that way. It's just different people handle things differently.
Yeah.
And I think that, in our communication, we cannot control the way the other person communicates. We can only control ourselves. It's, looking back on us before we look on the other person. And I think that, I tell my kids that all the time. You can say all the right things and say it in the wrong tone and it's still wrong. You can go talk to a person and be 100% kind and they're 100% a jerk back to you. You were still kind.
Yeah, just walk away.
You just need to walk away.
You can at least know you've done everything
Absolutely.
that you can in that situation. And that's happened to all of us.
It has. And that does lead us to, in conflict resolution, let's just say you've been hurt by somebody. You've chosen to forgive them. But we had a youth pastor actually years ago tell us, you have options. The Bible says to forgive. That's not an option. But it doesn't say put yourself in a situation where you're going to continually have conflict and get hurt over and over again. So forgive that person and either choose to restore and rebuild a relationship with them or choose to walk away.
Right.
And that goes for anybody, including family. You still need to be kind and you still need to be respectful and you need to still treat them like Christ would treat them. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that you need to have breakfast with them every single day and put yourself in harm's way.
And exactly what you're referencing, these 5 considerations also apply to spending time with people.
Absolutely.
Because technically, when we think about the holidays that we've just had and the ones coming up, the time and the place, okay, I'm not just choosing to go engage in a one-on-one dinner with somebody who can tend to make comments that offend me or whatever the case is. But it's Christmas, but it's New Year's, but it's a birthday party. And I have to choose to sometimes go to something with everybody else there where someone may be there who's been the offender. Right. And really you've sought reconciliation, but you haven't had restoration of that relationship. And so I'm thinking about what is my message? What am I trying to, am I just trying to, at that point, I'm kind of keeping the peace a little bit. I'm just going to that. I'm going to be respectful. I'm going to be kind. I'm going to consider my motive going into that. And I'm also going to consider that audience. Yeah. They're probably thinking very similar things about being around me, and right or wrong, that's just where we're at. So if I'm not walking in to have this whole conflict resolution conversation, sometimes it's just getting through an event.
And how many of us feel like that around the holidays?
Yeah.
I don't think there's anybody out there who doesn't have at least one relationship with challenges around the holidays. And it is hard. It's all of a sudden you've chosen to not spend any time with this person, but you kind of have to because there's other family involved and, it's just the kind thing to do, all of that. But, it is really important to not have those toxic relationships. And I think it's hard because around the holidays, sometimes we are thrown into that. But I think it's important to know that you can go in considering the time, place, message, motive, and audience and recognize that may mean I'm going to sit on the opposite end of the table and I'm going to smile and nod and I'm going to give you a hug and tell you, oh, it's so good to see you. Merry Christmas. But that's going to be the extent of our communication.
And that is okay. It is okay as long as you have prayerfully, and all of this is obviously covered in prayer. I mean, that goes without saying that this is not, if you haven't dealt with your own stuff, then you're not, even if you slow down to think about these things, you're still not even going to be able to have clarity in your own motive, or you're not going to be able to consider the other audience or your audience if you're not able to extend grace the way grace has been given to all of us. And so this is all with the premise that you claim to be a follower of Jesus, that we are in the Word, that we are attempting to get back to God's intention for communication.
Absolutely.
And like we talked about earlier with the how quick you go through these steps, there was a pastor that had said at one point in a leadership thing that sometimes you have these shoulder-to-shoulder conversations and sometimes they're across the table. And so you have to consider sometimes having a quick shoulder-to-shoulder conversation, I'll explain that in a second, keeps you from having to get to across the table. Yep. So meaning if you can figure out a way to have kind, concise, careful communication when something happens and comes up and you're just dealing with it right then, nipping it, then you hopefully won't escalate to the point of building up a big issue
that you have to have this huge conflict resolution
Not only do we have to
meeting.
talk about it, we have to talk about why I didn't say anything until now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Why did I let you, is it one of those hey, that hurt my feelings. Let's not say that. Just kind of laughing a little bit where the person gets the message. Or is it for the last 3 years, every single time our family gets together, you have said stuff to me
bite their head
under your breath, and it has hurt me for years and years and years. And you know what? I'm done.
Yeah. And what's sad
How many
is
times
how
has
many
that
times does
happened?
that happen at Christmas? You know,
Or-
I mean,
exactly.
seriously,
It's just
everything
you've
comes
built
out.
up everything, and teenagers. It's just the way God made you, us, at that time.
Yeah.
It is so easy. I mean, I remember being the kind of kid, again, non-confrontational. I would get home and like want my parents to come and talk to me and be like, what's wrong? What's wrong? Do you need something? Because I wasn't like, I had a bad day. Like
In
I
your
would
room
go
with
to
your
my
door
room.
closed, yeah.
I would just walk into my room, shut the door and sit there and be like,
I wonder if anybody will recognize.
if I'm seen.
Yeah.
I wonder if they noticed that the way I walked up the stairs was a little different than the way I walked up the stairs yesterday. Well, my parents are like living their own lives, expecting me, oldest child, pretty well together, to be okay. And like, why in the world would you not tell me if you have a problem? Instead, I'm up there, woe is me, moping away
like
my
we say all the
evening.
time, we can't fix something we don't know about.
So part of this is if you need to have this conversation, you have to find a way to communicate with the person that you need to have this conversation. Yeah. So, in closing for this episode, before we dive into more in a couple weeks, is, we've got to just slow down. We've got to take time, not in the moment. We've got to consider who we are. Yep. Am I the kind of person that wants to just deal with it head on? I'm like, let's get her done. Yeah. But my husband is like, I gotta, you're coming at me with whatever it is you want to say.
Like, I need about 3 to 5 business days to process, and then we'll talk again.
And I'm like, don't let the sun go down in your anger. And he's like, I don't know. I didn't even know you were angry 5 minutes ago. So again, considering those things, slowing down a little bit, but also in contrast, like if you're the audience that someone comes to you, you know what I mean? Because it's not all, like sometimes we're the communicator trying to have this conversation, and sometimes you're just going to be the audience. And that person didn't go through these steps. Right. So how are you going to respond if that happens?
You still respond the same way.
Yes, you do. You slow down and you realize, wow, if this person's coming at me, blah, 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 then you can set that boundary in that. We'll continue talking about these things because there's a million things that you can go, like nuances to this conversation. But at the end of the day, realize that the biblical principles of aiming to live at peace with everyone, the biblical principles of a gentle answer, turning away wrath, and a harsh word stirring up anger, by themselves should be like a gentle word. Right. Okay. So he probably wants me to slow down, consider what I'm trying to say, make sure it's in the right place, and not have my motive be to make the audience get angry and then me stir it up worse. So we need to just slow down a little bit.
So is this not the time or place to tell you that we're going to be sitting on opposite sides of the table at Christmas?
Probably not.
Kidding.
No, but let's say we'll hold each other accountable if we don't do this. And I'll just give you like we'll have a little hand motion or something.
Oh, yeah. We've got our own language. It's fine.
Oh my goodness. Well, next up, we're going to be talking a little bit more about just forgiveness. And if we're going to be dealing with communication and conflict resolution, sometimes it is deeper and it comes from a place of something we have like unresolved bitterness, unresolved forgiveness. And I think that's a huge topic that the Bible speaks to a lot. And so we're going to jump into that. And then a little bit more about just the practical, what happens when you learn to be a peacemaker, but you're walking around a bunch of peacekeepers.
Absolutely.
And how we can just really address that in our families, but also like in relationships and friendships. Again, Project Revival Podcast, here we are, just jumping into what we believe equips families to help hopefully see a revival of this next generation.
Absolutely.
And we love it. We love what we're doing. It's a lot. It's challenging for us each week when we kind of write these podcasts to think about how it impacts our own lives. But reach out to us with questions, thoughts, anything you'd like to give as feedback, and we'll join you next time.